Welcome to Expanding Your Faith, a podcast that tackles modern-day issues with a focus on spirituality, with Bishop Greer Godsey, Reverend Marc Trimm, Father Matt Schnabel, and Bishop Ben Williams. Thanks for listening. Take a breath, open your heart, and let's expand your faith together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Expanding Your Faith. I'm Bishop Greer, and joining me tonight is Reverend Marc.
Greetings, everyone.
Behind the scenes is Bishop Ben.
Blessings to all.
There he is. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. This was actually an idea suggested by Navi, one of our regulars on YouNow. And we're going to talk about a few characters of faith, people that we know or are inspired by or have an affinity for, and just kind of do a little history on them. Reverend Marc is going to share with us in just a moment some story and history of the Reverend Elder Troy Perry, the founder of Metropolitan Community Churches. And then somewhere about halfway through, I'm going to talk about the Right Reverend William Henry Francis Brothers, affectionately called the Bishop of Woodstock. So, two distinct religious characters in our respective movements. So, Reverend Marc, tell us about Reverend Elder Troy Perry.
Reverend Elder Troy Perry is a pioneer, if you will, and he is the founder of Metropolitan Community Churches. It's the denomination that my church is a part of, worldwide, in over 22 countries, and some 300 churches, 40+ thousand members. So, but Reverend Elder Troy Perry, 1940, July 1940, and he is a very interesting individual. He spearheaded some wading the waters into religious circles that embraced inclusive language and ideas and practices, and from that movement birthed the whole denomination. So some of his impact is very much felt across the world. Matter of fact, a number of things that he had through his journey are now resides at the Smithsonian. Some of his, I believe one of his Bibles, some of his notes, and some original material we'll talk about, founded and started at MCC. And very interesting individual. So Reverend Elder Troy Perry was a former Pentecostal preacher. He actually started out in the Baptist tradition and then moved over to a Church of God preacher, which is very interesting for me because my background is Pentecostal and was predominantly raised, before my family moved over to charismatic circles, was predominantly in the Church of God, same denomination as Troy Perry. My great-great-grandfather was one of the founding members of the Church of God, also a minister. So a little bit in my history and DNA, but Reverend Perry ministered in the Church of God. It was along his journey. He confided in ministers, people, so he had same-sex attraction, homosexual attraction, and they encouraged him to marry a woman.
It never quite seems to work out the way they hope it will.
No, it just doesn't seem to anyway. Eventually, he was kicked out, thrown out, and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to do next. But, having not been kicked out of my denomination, but having stepped down from pastoring and trying to figure out what the next thing, I can somewhat empathize with where he was, what was going on, and go full-time ministry over to not. His journey was interesting. Eventually separated from his partner, and he wandered for a little bit, attempting suicide, and just really struggling Of course, he was of age in very unaccepting moments in our
Right.
history, 50s, 60s, and got out of ministry and then moved into, by this time he was over in the Los Angeles area living, and following his attempted suicide, and then something else that had predominantly, or that deeply impacted him, was he witnessed some of the uprising at the Patch Bar over in Los Angeles.
Right.
This is now in 1968, so this is, prior to Stonewall, about a year or so prior to Stonewall, that he witnesses some, police officers going into the Patch Bar. The Patch Bar is known for being a place for LGBT community to go and socialize.
Right.
And so, as often happened, law enforcement of that day caught wind of places where the queer community would go and socialize. They raided it, saw that, were arrested. It had really a pretty big impact on him in contemplating what he would do next, and really created a righteous indignation on social watching social oppression towards the community, the queer community, and also realizing that this being a part of faith community,
Right.
and obviously at that time the LGBT community not largely accepted churches, matter of fact, completely crossed out, unwelcome. In some circles that has not changed, in other circles it's gotten a little better. So in 1968, beginning of October, he decided that he was going to launch something for both spiritual and possibly social justice collaboration.
Right.
So he took out an ad in the Advocate that he was going to begin holding spiritual service, church service for people a part of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender community, as they termed it that day, GLBT.
Right.
And I can't even say that without having to think about it, because I'm so used to saying the other. So in 1968, and he put his address on this advertisement and invited people to come for spiritual community, for worship, and to have church, Bible study, message, everything. So
That's extremely bold to do, especially nowadays, right?
well, particularly, yeah, definitely nowadays, and but even more so during that time period, because again, you have police officers going to locations and arresting people. Most places across America, it was not permitted for there to be any type of public gathering where LGBTQ individuals were concentrated. They couldn't have public gatherings. So 12 people showed up, and they went great. The get together. So he said, let's do it the next Sunday. The next Sunday they had 14. He said, okay, we're doing something all right. So the next Sunday they had 16. And then he tells the story by the fourth Sunday they had only 9. Just about how every preacher can attest. You have attendance go up steadily, and then you have that 1 or 2 Sundays where it's like everybody's forgotten where the church is. And then that following Sunday, 22 attended, and from that point forward, MCC has never dropped below 22 people, as he tells the story. But so things begin to happen, things begin to take place. There seemed to be a want for continual church service. They moved forward, began to grow there again in the Los Angeles area. And again, this is 1968, so this is just before Stonewall.
Troy Perry begins to move forward in creating that safe space and several different things that you do as you form a church and go forth. A couple of months after its beginning, however, they made national news, and look real quick because I'm trying to remember the magazine. Hold on. So let me find it here. So just a few months down the road from forming MCC, or starting the church, that is, he performs what is widely considered one of the first recorded public weddings on record. Of course, it's legally, it was non-binding because legally same-sex could not marry at the time, even in California. And it was two Latino gentlemen that Troy performed a service for. And things begin to grow from that point forward. And as they begin to grow, he took note, months down the road, he took note that there were so many different traditions and backgrounds that were coming to his services. He began to inquire of people's backgrounds. Catholic, Episcopal, Protestant were all in that group, and they were coming together. So he began to formulate, how do we make everybody that's coming from various backgrounds, different backgrounds, how do we do all that? How do we get everybody pulled together? How do we have a worship service that feels inclusive? How do we include all these different types of worship? My background's Pentecostal, and our worship tradition is vastly different than Old Catholic. We only would have, some of the difference is, we only had communion once every quarter, if that, as opposed to the Old Catholic tradition, and now the MCC denomination, that's every time we get together, every service. The gift of speaking in tongues in the Pentecostal circles is heavily emphasized, as opposed to other groups, and so on and so forth. So you got to get the picture there, where he has all these people coming, and with all these people, varying backgrounds. So how do you put that together? And they begin to put together the ideals, and then they started also realizing that their ministry wasn't just on the spiritual sect of what they needed to do. They weren't just doing spiritual work as far as church. I don't separate really spiritual or justice and social impacts from spiritual matters, but people get the idea of what I'm trying to talk about. How do you do church? How do you do church for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals? What does that look like? And so they started to put all that together. And then you fast forward, Stonewall happens, and all of the events forward with Stonewall, you have an increased number of people aware that here we have a whole group of folks in America who are being, ostracized and gone. They're the new group that police are going after, and so on and so forth. They're being denigrated and so on, and that moves us into a movement across America to launch Pride, or to begin to think of what we can do to organize marches, and that leads us into the Pride marches, leads us into the birth of the Pride flag, which originally was 7 colors. Pink was part of it, but as the history goes, there was a shortage of that color available during the birth of the Pride, and so they were worried about being able to print, and so they dropped the pink for that reason. And so from New York to Chicago and Los Angeles, these parades get organized. And who helps lead one of the first major ones there? And that's Troy Perry. He's out there. And not only is he a part of a parade, but he's a part of parade advertising, showing that, hey, we're a church. We're here ministering to people in various traditions. And so he's out there parading, and and you think about this. This is not too far removed from when so many things are happening with civil rights. Dr. King was shot and killed that year that MCC is founded and started. And so all of that's going on, and here you have a beautiful group of community coming together and marching for the rights of the LGBTQI community. So he's a pioneer. He has the vision that the queer community also has a place at the table of Christ, and he begins to do something about it. He has a dream, he has a vision, and he often says, he didn't know at that time what that meant, but over all the way over here in the Bible Belt in Augusta, Georgia, founded in 1987, just under 20 years removed, MCC of Augusta, now MCC of Our Redeemer, is founded. And then it moves across America and around the world. And his impact of moving towards the message of inclusion begins to start to resonate with varying groups. The Episcopal Church, some of the first to stand up and begin to affirm queer individuals and that they're welcome in the church, created a domino effect to have that inclusive mindset moving over into churches and to places of worship. And Reverend Perry, he's written several books. The first pamphlet that he wrote, that he handed out to people at the church, was homosexuality, not a sickness, not a sin. And wrapped up, there was a little pamphlet showing the beliefs of the church and so forth. Then they had, first copies of his books. All this now in the Smithsonian, catalogs for gay and queer history. And his impact continues even today. He's almost 80, I think 85 now. Not preaching like he used to, obviously. But still, a figurehead in our denomination, and the vision continues. We over here at MCC work diligently to make sure that our community knows that they belong at the table of Christ. That's one of the starting points for us, and then we work our way out from there. Hopefully we can continue for the next 40 plus years and become even more active, just as he was, by his inspiration. So many people, so many wonderful groups, a lot to a man who was kicked out of his denomination because of who he loved and thrown off to the side. He endured the depression and the attempts at suicides, seeing his fellow people ridiculed, and he stuck with God and received that vision to begin a safe space for those that everybody else was casting aside. While you're searching, was a couple of things for him. He held there in Los Angeles County a seat on the Commission for Human Rights Relationships in 1973. He was very much opposed to Anita Bryant in the Save the Children campaign. Again, several of his materials have been part of given to the Smithsonian, the charter, the church charter for MCC of San Francisco. That's now part of the museum. Some of the original copy of the Life magazine that documented the first recorded openly queer wedding is part of there. So a lot of amazing things are a part of our history, both now in our nation, but also part of our denomination. So really neat. The more you dive into it, you find out that he was a huge figurehead. 1978, he was honored by the ACLU, Lesbian and Gay Rights Chapter. They bestowed a humanitarian award upon him. He's met with several presidents, from President Carter, President Clinton, President Obama. Of course, during the time with President Clinton, he spent a good bit of time he participated in the first White House conference on HIV/AIDS. So very much a part of that. And so, yeah, he was also part of one of those prayer breakfasts during the Clinton administration. So there he is amongst all those other spiritual leaders and being recognized. So really, really amazing person. I've only briefly met him, and he's pretty dynamic in ministry, and a visionary.
Well, and hopefully they didn't make the mistake of sitting him next to Jerry Falwell at one of those breakfasts.
Oh, that would have been great.
That would have been amazing to watch.
Yeah, he probably would have loved it.
Probably. I don't know that Falwell would have, but...
No, Falwell would have got up and left.
Well, thank you, Reverend Mark. That's amazing. And I did not know all of that about Reverend Elder Troy Perry. I do remember doing a little bit of digging on him a while ago, and learning about everything that happened in New Orleans. And that just amazed me, because, he went there and conducted the funeral service after so many LGBT individuals were killed in a bar fire in New Orleans. And he inspired so many of them who were not out of the closet,
right,
that they chose to come out the front doors with him, even though the press was out there and protesters and everything else. And all of these people coming out of the closet basically at this funeral service. It was amazing. So he's a very inspirational person. And
back in the time where when you did something like that, and if you had a career or something very prestigious, it could be career ending.
Oh,
and
certainly.
Reverend Elder Perry is still alive, but one last thing, he's now they added his name to the Stonewall Hall of Fame, one of the 50 individuals. So he's a part of that. It just goes on. I just barely scratched the surface with him, and great guy to look into. And you can get you can go online and find some of his YouTube videos of him preaching. They're older because he's really been out of public speaking. One of the last times that he spoke was 2019 at General Conference. I got to hear him, and great guy.
Well, thank you, Reverend Mark. I appreciate that. I'm going to share probably not as illustrious of a character, but he's one of those interesting characters from Old Catholicism in the United States, and it's a man by the name of Bishop William Henry Francis Brothers, who was born in 1886. Interesting fact, he died 1 month after I was born. I was 1 month old when he died, in July 21st of 1979. So, and he was an old Catholic Benedictine, and an advocate for immigrants, workers, and the poor. He was originally born in England, found his way over here to Waukegan, Illinois, where he lived for a while with the Reverend Father Bernard Harding, former monk of St. Gregory's Abbey in Sacred Heart, Oklahoma. And and he decided to kind of wander around and ultimately found Old Catholicism, joined it, and began building Benedictines around him. And then One of the other big characters in our movement is Archbishop Villat, and Bishop Brothers was ordained by Villat sometime around 1910, 1911. It's a little murky. And then, as it typically goes in Old Catholicism, Brothers then deposed Villat, got rid of him, threw him out of the church. So that's a really weird situation. Let's see. What are some other things about him here? He then began, after he was ordained and consecrated, he began gathering a group of followers who were basically displaced young men who had nowhere to go. Their families had kicked them out. They were, living on the streets and stuff. And so he began to build this order up in Waukegan and became their abbot. Named the monastery St. Dunstan's Abbey there in Waukegan. According to the Living Church Annual, it was a rented house in Waukegan that he turned into this abbey. And then Bishop Grafton tried to take over it and declared himself their absentee abbot. Again, that's how old Catholicism does sometimes. St. Andrew's Cross, publication back in 1912, printed a letter which informed Grafton that Grafton had dedicated the Benedictine Abbey in Fond du Lac under the title of St. Dunstan's Abbey after the former Archbishop of Canterbury. They did mostly work amongst the foreign population in the Diocese of Fond du Lac, working with them at the time. Let's see. After Grafton died in 1912, his successor, Bishop Weller, did not support the monastery and basically told him to take a hike. And so the building was then repossessed by the diocese, and Bishop Brothers ended up buying a large home in Waukegan and continued to call it St. Dunstan's Abbey. At that point, because of all of the rifts, Brothers joined with 5 other members of his community, the Polish Old Catholic Church, under Bishop Jan Tichy. So that was interesting. Grafton had actually, this is one of the weird things in the Protestant Episcopal Church, which was where Brothers had come from before he joined Old Catholicism. Grafton had fallen ill, and he transferred all of the monastery and its oversight to Tichy and the Polish Old Catholic Church, and remained in charge of the monastery until 1914, despite Weller's attempts to shut it down. And that's when Tichy's diocese elected William Brothers as bishop, and his ill health forced him to give up his duties. So the American movement of Old Catholicism and the English movement of Old Catholicism started to form a rift around 1914. And so, but they had already promised to consecrate Bishop Brothers, to make him a bishop, when World War II hit. Or World War I hit, I'm sorry. World War I hit. And so it made travel a little dicey. So he waited for 2 years and then traveled to Europe to be consecrated. Bishop Joseph René Villat and Randolph de Landis Burgess were both guests, and old Catholic priests would often stop by and visit Brothers. Brothers was consecrated a bishop for the Czech Old Catholic Church October 3rd, 1916, in Waukegan by Delantis. The following day, Delantis consecrated Carmel Henry Cafora as bishop of the North American Old Roman Catholic Church. And a little fun fact, Cafora is considered a saint in Old Catholicism now. And so Brothers changed the name of the church from the Czech Old Catholic Church to the Old Catholic Church in America, and became their Archbishop Abbot. And one of the first acts he did as their new Archbishop Abbot was to unite the various ethnic communities and congregations that were independent of the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant Episcopal Church, USA, but they still maintained their Catholicity. He united them, brought them all together. Let's see. In 1945, the Kingston Daily Freeman printed an article on Bishop Brothers, in which they said he had worked among underprivileged children in Chicago prior to his move to New York. And he often worked with the poor and often exploited industrial workers in Chicago. So around 1939-ish or so, well, actually 1920, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. 1920, Brothers moved the headquarters of the Old Catholic Church in America and the Old Catholic Benedictines to New York City. And at that point, he guided the church through the rough times of the Depression while still maintaining his spiritual support of all those people. During the Depression, he joined with other religious leaders to feed the hungry. His benefactors gave him large sums of money to meet the needs in New York and to help them set up soup kitchens throughout the city of New York. Known to the people in the vicinity in which he worked and where, as a child, he came to reside with his family when they arrived from England, he had forsaken the opportunities of the business world to minister for the uncared for, exploited immigrants working in the steel mills. There, in the midst of the despised foreigner, his sympathetic understanding of their problems and his practical attempt to solve them made his mission bountiful in good works. And so he became known throughout New York, not just the city, but the state, that if you were a young man homeless or in need of guidance or a retreat, you could show up at the Abbey anytime, day or night, and would find a place of safety. So that was wonderful. Then in 1938, now we get to 1938, where the story gets good. He moved from New York City to a little city that none of y'all have ever heard of before, called Woodstock, New York. The very following year, 1939, Bishop Brothers, they called him Father Francis in New York, and 3 members of a 7-member Maravite group repaired an abandoned Protestant Episcopal Church in the USA chapel on Overlook Mountain to use as nothing more than a monastic chapel. The chapel was placed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Church of the Holy Transfiguration of Christ on the Mount. There's a name for your stationery.
There you go.
They planned beekeeping and raising goats as a farming venture.
As one does.
As one does when you need to. Yep. I mean, right?
That's right.
In 1940, the Kingston Daily Freeman reported that Francis of the community of Flesianau planned to lease a 20-acre property for his proposed non-sectarian summer school for boys, which will be known as St. Dustin's School. He planned to convert it into a permanent year-round institution in the future. Around the same time, another property was leased to Francis' congregation. The property included an old barn that was converted into a place of worship known as St. Dustin's Church. It was destroyed in 1945 by a fire started by a kerosene stove explosion while Francis was preparing for a service. That's one way to get out of having services.
I'll keep that one in my back pocket.
Yeah, you might need it someday. But by the 1950s, the document account was embellished into a story that the converted barn was burned during the war, whether by vigilantes or act of God, no one knows. You know, that's how things happened back in the 1940s and 50s. Didn't have to be true, it just had to be sensational. Francis invited Eamon Hennessy, who wrote the 1952 book Autobiography of a Catholic Anarchist, to visit him in Woodstock. Hennessy wrote of him, "This kindly, thin, and agile old man was my match in conversation. He knew many old-time radicals whom I had known." Oh, there you go. I mean, a social activist in the Catholic worker movement started by St. Dorothy Day. Hennessy was a Christian anarchist and anarcho-pacifist. He was a member of both the Socialist Party of America and the Industrial Workers of the World. Hennessy said, "As I understood it, these people were not radical, but had meekly followed their leader just as many others do." He narrated how Francis had a friend drive Francis and himself to Mary Farm, to the Catholic Worker Movement farming commune near Newburgh, New York, where Francis thought he would meet St. Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, but she had just left for New York. Talk about timing. Hennessy went on to reflect about Francis's group at Woodstock. I was not attracted to this small denomination because it did not seem to have any life, with its simplicity, kindness, and spirit of love. It just wasn't wild enough for Hennessy. For a long while, there were no postulants coming into the order of Benedictines, so it was just Father Francis and Brother Cyril, and they would go around and, do good works around the area. He was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt and the Hearst family and several other social society families who contributed to his church there in Woodstock. Now, here's the interesting thing. A lot of people don't know that. I keep saying that, I know. A lot of people don't know this about Bishop Brothers or Father Francis, whichever you want to call it. But there was this little unknown, unheard of pop-up thing that happened in Woodstock called the Woodstock Festival. I know most of you have never heard of that. It had
What's that?
people like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and all these people who are supposedly singers or something, who came and spent time in Woodstock and on this farm. And so during the Woodstock Festival, Father Francis opened up the church and the monastery, the Benedictine monastery, so that these ragamuffins could come and clean up. They could come and do their laundry. They could come and take showers, and he would always have food for them to eat. Because a lot of the people who came to Woodstock literally hitchhiked across the country in order to be there,
Right.
They didn't have hardly any money. They didn't have any supplies. They were just there. And so he made sure that if anybody at Woodstock needed food or shelter or care of any kind, that they were welcome to come to the church, come to the monastery, and receive it. And so he, according to history, Father Francis presided over many funerals in Woodstock, and as well as many joyous weddings and baptisms. Most of the artists and hippies in Woodstock would go on to be married or baptized or put in the ground by Bishop Brothers. So that is interesting. If you want to know more, because we're running low on time, I see. If you want to know more about Father Francis, there's a documentary by Toby Carey called Father Francis that talks some about his life and what he did in Woodstock in particular. Yeah, if you want to check that out, that is always available. I'll leave you one last tidbit about him. He was also very friendly with the Tibetans, the Tibetan Buddhists who hung out around Woodstock, which in the 1940s to 1960s was not exactly a
Right.
good thing.
Right.
They were considered deviants. They were considered subversives, and so he was very much a friend of theirs and would routinely go over for tea, have tea with the Tibetan monks. So, really cool guy. If you get a chance, check him out, because he is one of our big names in the old Catholic movement.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
This was a good idea. Thank you, Navi, for suggesting it.
That's right.
We'll have to do another one of these at some point, come up with a few more inspirational figures to highlight and talk about.
We'll have Bishop Ben lead us next time.
Right. Bishop Ben can tell us about the great and holy Darlene. So anyway, I want to thank Reverend Mark and Bishop Ben for being here tonight. It's always a pleasure to have you guys on.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to. And we will see you all not next Saturday. Next Saturday is Augusta Pride Fest. And so we will probably be dead by 8 p.m. Saturday evening.
Most likely. Yeah, most likely.
But we will see you in 2 weeks for our next edition of Expanding Your Faith. Remember to catch us on podcasts.myocci.social, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcast. Until then, when we once again attempt to expand your faith, keep shining bright, my friends.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Expanding Your Faith. If today's conversation encouraged you, share the episode. It helps more people find the show. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also find us online at pod.myocci.social and ourstfrancis.org. Follow us on Facebook at Expanding Your Faith. Our producer is Bishop Ben Williams. Expanding Your Faith is an outreach ministry of St. Francis Parish and Outreach in Augusta, Georgia, produced in cooperation with the Metropolitan Community Church of Our Redeemer in Augusta, Georgia. Until next time, keep expanding your faith.